So today, continue moving through chapter 5 here. We are going to look at our performance assessments. We're going to start looking at our performance assessments. We are looking at the Davies test, Shark's skill test, which are both agility assessments. Now, what's cool about performance assessments is until now, like when we've been talking about assessments, we talked about the overhead squat, which obviously like we know what normal posture looks like, right? And so when you are in a variation, like when you're outside of that normal squat posture, we know that there's dysfunction and we know what's kind of going on, right? The 3-minute step test or the Rockport walk test, we know cardiovascularly how someone should be able to perform. And then we compare their numbers to sort of how they should be performing. And that sort of allows us to put them in a category, So we have it's almost like we can use assessments to kind of categorize our clients. Like we got our knee cave inners, our excessive leaners, our low back archers, our zone 1 clients who did very poorly on the cardio assessment, zone 2 clients, zone 3. We've got that's sort of like the approach we've taken to assessments so far. But performance assessments are a little bit different. They're kind of a different take on things. This isn't so much about sort of like, comparing your statistics to these standardized tables. This is really more about comparing your statistics to future you, The Davies test and the Shark skill test are both agility assessments, and they're just you versus future you. They're just, you're going to compare your beginning numbers to your ending numbers. Faster you are able to perform either of these, the better you're doing, They're almost like circumference measurements. Like obviously, waist to hip ratio, those have some norms. And if you fall outside of those norms, that means something. But it's almost like it's circumference measurements. You're just comparing like your waist measurement to like your new waist measurement, and like, hey, are those inches going up? Are those inches going down? Like, what's happening? And so that's kind of the approach we're taking here when we look at performance assessments. So these are used for clients trying to improve their overall, athletic performance. There really is no standard table for how well they should perform in these assessments, but it's a really excellent way for you to kind of see improvements over time. I love doing performance assessments, even if I make them up with my clients, like I've done that before where my clients will, like I had 2 older clients read a magazine article and they were like, we read that, one of the ways to tell how youthful you are is how easy it is for you to get up off the ground without using your hands. And so we created an assessment around that and measured, worked on it for a month and then looked for improvements. And it was fun, That's what's kind of fun about these types of performance assessments. So the 2 primary ones we're going to look at today before I do some sort of independent riffing on some stuff. The 2 that we're looking at today are the Davies test and the Shark's skill test. And so the Davies test is an upper body agility assessment. So that definition is what you're going to want to know. If you ever do get any questions related to these performance assessments, they're going to be, definition wise, like what is the Davies test, or there'll be questions like, how many inches apart are the hands when you're doing the Davies test? So, you do want to know the definition. You want to know a little bit about it. So let's go ahead and get the sort of textbook stuff out before we talk about, actually doing it in the real world. So that what it is the Davies test is a performance assessment designed to assess your upper extremity agility and stabilization, right? So that's what you're looking for. Now, this assessment is performed in a push-up position with your hands 36 inches apart. So you're going to set up a 1 yard, sort of use a yardstick or whatever. I mean, probably not a yard. Nobody has a yardstick anymore unless you're a teacher from the 90s. But like you set up set up 2 pieces of tape 36 inches apart. And what you're going to do is you're actually going to be in that push-up position with your feet together, and your client's going to reach and touch the opposite hand, go back to that neutral position, and then reach and touch. And they're going to go back and forth, touching one hand to the other, and they're going to get as many touches as they can in 15 seconds. and you're going to do a couple rounds. So what this is testing is like, if your core is strong, it's going to be easy for you to transfer directions, right? One of our definitions, I know, Raul, Robert, you guys have heard this before, but Charlie, at the end of this mod, we're going to go over some definitions. We're going to talk about like what agility is defined as. Agility is your ability to change directions and your ability to accelerate and decelerate. So the faster you are able to accelerate, the faster you're able to decelerate, and the faster you're able to change directions. That's our definition of agility. So if you think about the Davies test, I'm just basically just changing directions back and forth, right? I'm going left to right to left to right to left to right. And that's why it's an upper body agility assessment. It falls under that category. So, you know, like I said, what you're going to do is the position you're going to begin by placing 2 pieces of tape 36 inches apart on the floor. Position your client in a push-up position with one hand on each piece of tape, and then you want to have their feet together. You don't want to let their feet be wide for 2 reasons. Number one, it makes the assessment easier, right? If their feet are wider, they're going to have a wider base of support, which means that there's less challenge to the agility. And number two, if you're not measuring how far apart their feet are, you're going to be inconsistent in the next time you assess them. You know, maybe this time they're hip width apart, and then the next time they're shoulder width apart, which makes it easier, right? Or maybe they're really wide the third time you test it, and it's like, so then they're getting easier, but then all of a sudden they go back to that hip width apart, and it's like, wow, your Davies test got way worse from the first time we did it. What happened? We don't want that to happen, because then that makes it look like your training program isn't working. So one of the biggest things, that's why we want to be really consistent here. Always do the feet together. That'll ensure consistency, So feet together, hands 36 inches apart. And then you're going to instruct your client to move his or her right hand to touch their left hand. They're going to perform alternating touches on each side for 15 seconds. And then you're going to give them 60 seconds rest in between each set. And you're going to do 3 trials. And you're just going to record all of those. So if you look on, again, you go to nasm.org. And I go down to the downloads, right? By the way, I actually meant to pull this up yesterday. I totally spaced in both classes. I didn't think of this until I was laying in bed last night. But here is the assessment for dynamic posture. Like when you're doing the overhead squat, single leg, or the pushing and the pulling assessment, this is a sheet that you can use to mark that all down. So in the anterior view, did the feet turn out? If it happened on the left, circle it. If it happened on the right, circle it. Did the knees cave in, left and right? Do they have an excessive forelean? You can just write yes in here. Or did the arch? So these are all the observations. Low back arch, shoulders elevate, right? And then that gives you a space to write the overactive, underactive muscles, although to be fair, it's not actually really enough space. So they also have, do they have, oh, they don't have it on here anymore. Man, I missed the old version of this. I missed the old assessment forms. They had a much larger list back in the day. Let me see if I can, maybe it's on old Google. NASM assessment form. Davies test. Looking for a download. I don't think I'm gonna find it. Doesn't have the Davies, no. All right, well, they used to. Well, you can always just write it. Wait, did they put in the cardio? No. So what you can do is you can just kind of write it down or perform your own assessment. You can make your own assessment sheet. We actually have like a Sochi version that I can pull up here. This is like an assessment sheet that I created a long time ago that just kind of has every NASM assessment on one file. I'll send this out to everybody in the email today. Where is it? Where am I? Oh no, I know I have it on here. Client forms. There it is. So you can see actually here, this is sort of a data sheet that has everything. And so you put like your client's name and stuff, age, weight, height. And we'll go through this and kind of make up a person here. We'll do a little bit of this today, actually. And then there's the Davies test. You got round 1, 2, and 3, and then we got the Sharks test here as well. So anyway, that took way longer than I wanted it to. When we're looking at the Davies test, right, you're basically just going to have a place to write down their 3 trials, keep that in their file, and look for improvement. So I'm going to show you a quick little video on how to do this. Hey,
everybody, Don Hayes.
Let's see, do I like this? Fitness assessment Davies test. You got the first video, sir. All right, we'll watch your video. All right.
Hey, everybody, Don Hayes here at AKP. Get ready for my workout. It is 11 minutes after 1 o'clock p.m. Friday afternoon. And I'm getting ready for my warm-up. I'm going to do some dynamic upper bench press for some speed and power. And throughout my warm-up, I decided I wanted to share something with you guys. Now, for all the baseball players that are out there, this is a great exercise to integrate into your warm-up because it helps to stabilize the shoulder girdle, and it helps to serve as an indicator type exercise for you to kind of see how your core strength is developing, if you're progressing or if you're not progressing. It's called Davies test, and in the next clip, I'm going to show you exactly how to perform this exercise, and it could also be used as an assessment tool for any pitchers, any catchers.
All right, I'm getting a little impatient here. I'm just going to skip to where he's doing the test.
I take my stopwatch and I get 15 seconds. We're going to have them extend out at one leg, okay, and make sure that their chest and their sternum is directly in line with their wrists.
Very true.
Right, and then they're going to extend out at their other leg. Once they're in this plank position, I give them a countdown. I say 3, 2, 1, go. When I say go, I start the clock, and for 15 seconds, their goal is going to be transferring their hands back and forth. I'm going to move in slow motion so you can see this, and then I'll do it at live speed. Okay, so I'm going to get my pinkies lined up. Okay, in slow motion, my goal in performing this evaluation or assessment is going to be to transfer this hand over, touch the back of my hand, replace my hand right back where it was, and then take my other hand and touch the back palm of my other hand. Now again, we're trying to do this as quickly as possible, and once that 15-second time period elapses, we're counting the reps that we get, and the next time we perform this assessment, we'll be able to tell, based on what number we get, whether we're progressing in our workout or if something needs to be adjusted as far as shoulder stability, core or core strength. Okay? So I'm going to perform this at live speed so you can have an idea of what it looks like. Okay? Here we go. I'm going to get my one pinky lined up right on the measuring tape to number 1. I'm going to take my other hand, get my pinky lined up, 36. Okay? Here we go. Get myself in a plank position. Here we go. 3, 2, 1, go.
Woo! He's stable. That is speedy. Man, that guy's a lot faster than me. He's gonna get like 30 touches.
All right, so that was for 15 seconds. I didn't count, all right? But as you can see, you really have to do a great job of stabilizing your core, stabilizing.
Hold on, I want to know how many guys. I want to know how many this guy got. That was really fast.
Here we go. Let me get myself in a plank position. Here we go. 3, 2, 1, go.
You got 35 touches. I don't know how accurate that was to 15 seconds because I didn't have a stopwatch there, but that is pretty freaking good. So that is how you're going to do the Davies test. Now, I do want to say, I don't know if I put this in the notes. Yeah, I didn't put it in the notes. I do want to say this. The original version of the test is, like I said, 36 inches apart, 15 seconds. I want you guys to definitely have those numbers memorized, you know, in case they ever ask you about it on a test or homework or whatever. You know, you'll get a question that says, blank assesses upper body agility, right? That's the Davies test. Or maybe you'll get a question that says, the Davies test has clients put their hands blank inches apart, and that answer is 36, right? Or an upper body assessment where, you know, the client reaches from hand to hand and touches for 15 seconds, as many repetitions as possible, is known as the what? And that's the, you know, Davies test. So, you know, any variation of that, those are the kind of pieces of information you want to grab onto, right? It's an upper body agility assessment. It's 15 seconds per round, and it's 36 inches apart. Now, in the real world, I will say 36 inches is pretty freaking far apart for certain clients. You know, if your client is like 5'3", that is 36 inches apart is like, that's a mile away. So you can always modify this. You just got to make sure that you write that down and be consistent the next time you test your client, right? You could easily say, we did 30 inches apart. We did 24 inches apart. You could do whatever you want to do on the assessment as long as you write it down and you're being consistent every time you assess your client. The real key here, guys, is always being super consistent with fitness assessments. Always make sure that you are doing them the same every time. Now, any questions on the Davies, by the way? Questions, comments, concerns? You guys feeling good about that? Irene, you rocked out the Davies test last time. You were great at it.
It was fun.
Yeah, right? It's a blast.
Yeah.
I like performance assessments. I like all the, you know, performance stuff just because it's like, you know, it kind of feels like you're trying out for the Olympics, you know?
Yeah, the little, like, challenging yourself, you know, I love the whole concept of that.
I'm so much more motivated by stuff like that.
Me too.
Okay, so next one we've got is the Sharks skill test, right? And so the way this works is totally a similar concept. And this is a lower body agility assessment. So it's a performance assessment designed to assess lower extremity agility and neuromuscular control. So you want to think of this as like, you know, this is a progression from the single. If your client can do a single leg squat assessment, you know, they did the overhead squat, you feel really confident, you gave them the single leg squat, they really kind of, you know, maybe their knee caved in, but they did well on it overall. They, you know, they found that they had good balance. This is a really great assessment that you can go and like be like, all right, well now, you know, I've used the overhead squat to figure out like what muscles I want to work on, but like, let's look for some improvement here and just see how you're doing over time. Let's track your statistics. We can do something like the Sharks skill test. And so this is really great because again, it's just them versus future them. It's always a really fun motivator. I love returning to this every couple of months with my clients and just showing them, it's like, hey, this is going to take us like 2 minutes of time to kind of practice it. And like, I've got your old numbers, let's do it again. And they're like, oh man, not the jumpy thing. And it's like, yeah, let's do it. And they're like, oh, okay. And then like, they see it's like, oh my gosh, I improved by like a full, you know, 2 to 3 seconds. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it's kind of a big deal. So it's always a fun little motivator, and it's kind of a fun exercise to perform. So the way this works, you're going to position your client in the center of a box, like a grid, right? 9 boxes, each of them 1 foot in by 1 foot. So that's a 36 inch by 36 inch box, split into like 3 rows of 3, right? So that's that's 12 inches by 12 inches for each box. Honestly, you can use the tiles on like a gym floor if you want. Like if you have like classic, just standard 12-inch tiles. I've done that plenty of times. I'll usually have like some masking tape and I'll mark off like, you know, which boxes are which. Some gyms will actually have a Davies mat or a Davies grid for you. We used to have one just taped onto the Sochi floor that we made. But you're gonna position your client in the center box, hands on their hips, and they're going to stand on 1 leg. Their job is to jump into every single box in the grid and always return to that center box always returning to the center box before they jump into the next one. So they're going to hop from box to box to box in a designated pattern. You always want to be consistent with the pattern. That way they don't make it up or get confused or forget a box. You don't want them to like hurt their score because they're confused, you know? We want to be really consistent with the pattern here. Give them a practice run with each foot. So they'll end up doing 3 rounds with each leg, but only 2 of the rounds are going to count. Perform twice with each foot, so that's a 4 times total. And you're going to keep track of the time. Now, their hands have to stay on their hips. Their other foot is not allowed to touch the ground, and they want them to jump into that specific pattern. So if the non-hopping leg touches the ground, that's a penalty. If their hands come off the hips, that's a penalty. If their foot goes into the wrong square, that's a penalty. And you're going to penalize them 0.1 seconds every time any of those things happen. So you're going to have a stopwatch. The Davies test was how many touches in 15 seconds. The shark skill test is just how fast can they perform it. So you're going to go 3, 2, 1, go. You're going to hit that stopwatch. They're going to do the designated pattern. And when they return to that center box at the very, very end, hit that stopper and let them know how long it took. Let's watch a quick little video on how this looks, right? Fitness assessment, shark skill. All right, I pulled this video up before. I will say this grid is massive. Those boxes are way too big, unless this guy is just like 3'2". But here's a cool little assessment.
Shark skill test is designed to assess agility and neuromuscular control of the lower extremity and is a progression from the single leg squat test. The setup of the test requires 9 12 by 12 inch boxes placed in a 3 by 3 pattern. The starting point of the test is in the center square. The athlete stands hands on hips and on one leg. The test is performed by hopping into each box in the designated pattern, always returning to the center square or moving on to the next in the sequence. Prior to the test, the athlete should perform 2 practice runs, 1 with each foot in the designated pattern to ensure they understand the test going forward. Once the athlete is set, perform a time test as quick as possible. The clock starts on their movement into the first box and ends when the athlete lands in the center square after completion of the designated pattern. Time testing is performed twice on each foot, alternating after each test. If at any time during the test the non-hopping leg touches the ground, the hands come off the hips, the hopping foot goes into the wrong square, or does not return to the center square, a 1/10 of a second penalty is added to their time. The pros of the test include it being quick and easy to set up and to perform with minimal equipment required. The results give a good basis on the athlete's agility and neuromuscular control of the lower extremity. The cons of the test include the test not being suitable for individuals suffering from injury in the hopping leg of the knee or ankle due to the physical requirements of the test. The potential human error with the time of performance is also a problem with this test.
So kind of fun, right? Like, again, this is just going to be them versus future them. Here's a video. If I remember right, we watched this one too, and this guy's super fast as well. I think this guy's a rock star. And this one's actually like the right number of inches in the boxes.
The objective of the timed shark skill test is to measure your single leg functional balance.
That is speedy.
Set up a 3-foot square grid as
Is he barefoot? No.
And assume a ready position in the center square with your hands on your hips. Start the test with single leg hops, alternating from the center square to the other squares using a clockwise pattern.
That's good mobility too.
Clockwise pattern. 1/10 of a second will be deducted if you drop your hands or miss the appropriate.
So you see how he missed the box, right? So that gave him like a small, yeah, right. That gave him like a small penalty. Whew. Speedy. So anyway, those are, that's a pretty good, that's a pretty good assessment to tell, like, how agile your client is, right? And again, these are just like versions of like them versus future them. So things I want you to memorize about the shark test. Obviously, its definition, first of all, right? It is a lower extremity agility assessment. I don't know that you'll see this sentence. It's a progression for the single leg squat. I don't think you'll see that. But it is going to be hands on the hips, jumping in a 3x3 grid, and they get penalized for, you know, non-hopping leg touching the ground, hands leaving the hips, and foot going into the wrong square. I honestly doubt you'll actually see this, but I don't know. Maybe you might. I don't know if I've ever seen that question before personally, but then again, I haven't seen every single question they have. But the big one, it's a lower extremity agility assessment. Definitely know that. And it's a 12-inch by 12-inch box and a 3x3 grid. Those are sort of the big ones. And actually, guys, oh, and there's all the statistics for how to do it and stuff. Take a look. That's actually all we're going over in terms of like traditional assessments today. I want to talk more and more about like how to kind of write programs like this, how to write programs for our clients, you know, based on like fitness assessments and stuff. So do we have any questions about the performance assessments today before we kind of get out of PowerPoint land and go into program writing land?
No, they're pretty self-explanatory.
Yeah, this, like I said, this is small content today, but if there are any questions, let me know. Okay, so we're going here, and today we are looking at upper body dysfunction. So last night we talked about it, right? So we're gonna actually look at two different versions here. So there are two common movement compensations. There is, when it comes to like the shoulder area, right? Hold on just one second, I wanna see what this is. Oh, foot flattens and hammerheads, I forgot I did that one. And knees cave out, and then low back rounding. I forgot I even did those. All right, so let's take a look at the idea that, like, you know, we're looking at shoulder joint dysfunction, right? So on the overhead squat, right, our movement compensations are feet turn out, knees cave in, low back arches, excessive forward lean, and then the other one, the last one on the overhead squat, is arms fall forward. So while they are squatting, they're having a hard time keeping their arms up, and so their arms are kind of dropping down like this, right? They're not really staying where they are bisecting the ears, right? They're not staying in line. So that is a sign that they have upper body dysfunction, right? So I'm going to skip forward to that. This is the forward head routine here. So looking at an arms fall forward client, let's take a look at the list here of overactive, underactive muscles. We go to nasm.org, we go to the downloads page, and we look at the postural distortions table, right, for the overhead and the single leg squat. And we look and we see from the lateral view in the upper body, the arms fall forward. Our overactive muscles list is going to be our latissimus dorsi, right? And that one makes perfect sense, like right away, right? You think about like the arms falling forward, like your latissimus dorsi, those big muscles that literally tie underneath the armpit there, right? Their job, whoop, what is this? Is it a video? That's not what I meant to click. Their video is to perform shoulder extension, right? So they pull our arms this way, and to perform shoulder adduction. One other thing that they do, though, you know, the two ways that we perform the overhead squat is either with the palms forward, or generally I like to have the palms in a neutral position. Now, to be fair though, when you put them in a neutral position, that does make things ever so slightly harder, because now you're performing some external rotation and your lats perform internal rotation. So when your arms are in this position, that actually makes it a little harder to keep those arms up, because now they're being pulled into a deeper stretch, right? Sorry, one second. So if we're looking at that, if we're looking at those arms falling forward, right, we know that that's because the lats are pulling us into extension, or they are pulling us into adduction, or they are internally rotating, which is making it hard. You know, when your palms are this way, it's freaking impossible to raise your arm up, right? Because your humerus can't rotate around that ball and socket joint. So the latissimus dorsi, definitely an overactive muscle here, causing that arms falling forward situation. Now, another one here. Oh, yeah.
Hey, Brad. Yeah. Say someone's like double jointed. Does that do you have to like work around that when you like create a design?
Yeah, sometimes. So people who are double jointed, right? What that is obviously they're not. You know, they don't have extra joints, right? Like it's not like there's double, you know, extra bones coming together, right? What double jointed means is that they just have a lot of extra space between their joints. So because there's so much more space, right? They have these exaggerated ranges of motion where they can just move. You see like contortionists be able to. Let's see here. If we see like a double jointed elbow, right? You see people who can do this like crazy hyperextension of the elbow, where you see hypermobility, right? So that's what we call hyperextension, right? If this is elbow flexion, this is elbow extension, being able to go beyond that range of motion is what we call hyperextension. You also have hyperflexion, you just don't notice it very often. Hyperflexion of a joint. See if I can even find a good example. Oh, I mean that actually kind of works. You'll see it in the neck sometimes, I guess. I just forget about the neck. Your neck is able to move down this way, but if you really like move it beyond like a normal range of motion, that's hyperflexion. Most of us actually can hyperflex our neck because we spend all day doing this. So, you've got hyperextension, you've got hyperflexion. That's what somebody who's double jointed can do. They just have so much more space. So here's the thing about like space, right? We want space. We want to have space between our joints. With a lack of space, you're going to have a lack of mobility. It's going to be harder for you to move through a full range of motion, right? But with increased space comes decreased stability. So like your ball and socket joint, right? If we look at the shoulder girdle, right? If we look at our shoulder joint, this is a ball and socket joint, right? Meaning that it is the most mobile type of joint. You get 4 ball and socket joints in your body. You got your 2 in the hip bones, you get your 2 in the shoulder bones, right? Shoulder joints and hip joints, not bones. So like these are the most mobile joints that we've got because they can perform flexion, they can perform extension, abduction, adduction, internal rotation, external rotation, and they can do this motion, which is called circumduction. And circumduction is a combination of every joint action simultaneously, right? If you think about like a lasso, right, that's circumduction. So not every joint can do all of that. So your shoulder joint is really, really mobile. Well, what is the number one shoulder injury that you generally tend to hear about? Shoulder dislocations, right? You hear about like dislocations or subplexions, right? Where basically this bone has been moved outside of the joint. Obviously that can happen in the ankle too. I mean, it happens in ankles because there's a lot of sports and stuff, but like generally you get like an ankle sprain where you tear like a single ligament. You don't generally completely dislocate your ankle. I mean, it can happen, obviously. My buddy Josh, keep a picture on my phone actually of my buddy Josh when he dislocated his ankle. I show it in class sometimes. But the shoulder joint, dislocations are super, super common. So in a client who's double jointed, if they have a lot of extra space in there, you've got to be cautious of things like arthritis because of that extra space causes the bones to sometimes collide with like a greater impact. And you got to be cautious of like dislocations. So you're going to spend a lot of time working on stabilization exercises for people who are double jointed. You don't have to worry. Their arms are not going to fall forward. In fact, it would probably be the exact opposite. They'll probably be able to take their arms like way up and back and behind, which again is great as long as it doesn't cause the bone to just all of a sudden fall outside of the joint. Does that answer your question, Roel? I kind of went off on a tangent there.
Yeah.
But luckily, I was kind of pivoting into what I did want to talk about here. So look, with that decreased stability, that is why, look at what your shoulder joint actually looks like. Look at all these ligaments here. Look at all of this white connective tissue that is there to be like, hold that freaking thing in place, right? Whereas like a normal joint would maybe have like some webbing that kind of just holds it together, and it's got a little joint capsule and it stays for the most part in line because there's not as much mobility, there's not as much space. With this much space, your body is covering the whole thing with as much ligaments as possible. Think of your ligaments in this case, think of them as like duct tape, right? You're trying to get something to hold together rather than screwing it together, which would mean that it wouldn't be very mobile. You're just duct taping the darn thing. And that's going to hopefully hold it in place, but it's not quite as stable as if it were glued or screwed together, Same thing is true of your hip joint. Hip joint dislocations are also really common. They're a little less common because luckily these ligaments are massive. And generally people are so muscularly tight, they don't have range of motion anyways. But your hip joint is that's that other ball and socket, right? It can rotate, it can circumduct, it can flex, it can extend, it can abduct, it can adduct. So those are your ball and socket joints in the body. Now, take a look. We were just talking about, latissimus dorsi causing those arms to fall forward. Part of that is that it's just pulling the arms down. And part of it is that it's internally rotating the palms. Everybody try this at home right now. Just take your palms, you're facing forward. Now rotate your palms face down, and you just try to raise your arms up as high as you can. It's kind of difficult, right? Like you'll notice, like if you really, like now take them and really rotate them all the way around to where like it's fully internally rotated, like where your shoulders are kind of rounding, it becomes like impossible. Don't push too hard, by the way. But it almost becomes impossible to raise your arms all the way up overhead, right? And that is actually because, I'm gonna pull, if you look right here, see this freaking little ridge right there? That is what gets caught on this little bone right here. This is what keeps you from having that extra range of motion. And by the way, that's a good thing. Like we're glad we have this ridge here. Sometimes it's frustrating that we can't get our arms up very high, but that little ridge is what keeps your arm, from being able to go into this super exaggerated range of motion, then all of a sudden pop off your shoulder joint. So we're grateful for that ridge, but it is also what sometimes gets pulled a little bit too close because of internal rotation, and then it starts grinding early, which means you have a decreased range of motion because your arm is not sitting where it is supposed to in the joint. That can be caused by the lats causing internal rotation, but more than likely it is caused by this muscle called the teres major, which is not a rotator cuff muscle, but it is located near all of those other rotator cuff muscles. And that teres major is running from the bottom of your scapula underneath the armpit, and then it actually ties. It's running like this. It goes like behind the arm and then grabs the front of the arm like that. It's reaching underneath and it's grabbing in the front. That's why when it pulls your palm, it pulls your shoulder in this way. So the teres major is in charge of swinging your arm closed like that. Your lat is assisting in that as well. Like if you hold your lat and you just internally rotate, you'll even feel a little squeezing happening. Or if you just rotate here, you'll sometimes feel a little squeeze there. But your teres major is one of the main muscles that does that internal rotation. When you're typing at the computer and your arms are rounding forward, that's your teres major pulling your arm in like this, right? So we need to get back in this direction. We need to get that external rotation. Pinch those arms back, get those palms facing forward again, right? Again, this is not an official assessment, but one of the ways you can tell if somebody's got an overactive teres major and lats, you can find shoulder rounding is if just when they're sitting, they kind of sit like this, and see how my thumbs are kind of facing inward like this. They're rounded around the front of my body. Ideally, they should be sitting off to the side like this, thumbs facing that way. That's one of the easiest ways to kind of spot shoulder rounding in a very unofficial fitness assessment situation. So that's your teres major. And it's there, the opposite of that, and you'll see this in our underactive list. The opposite of that is going to be your teres minor, which is part of your rotator cuff. And I'll just pull up a picture of that before and then we'll move on here. So teres minor. So a rotator cuff muscle, you'll notice it is in the back, right? So there's your teres minor. You know, it's originating just above that teres major. Teres major is down here, right? Teres minor is up here. But then look at how the major goes under the arm and inserts on the front of the bone. Teres minor inserts onto the back of the bone. And so the teres minor pulls this way, and the teres major pulls this way. Thing is, teres major is getting help from your giant freaking lat muscle. So that's why it's so much more common for us to have this rounded shoulder posture, right? So we need to focus a lot on just pulling those shoulders back, right? Little external rotations as often as we can to kind of strengthen that rotator cuff. But I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. We'll come back to that in just a sec. So overactive muscles so far: latissimus dorsi, internal rotator, shoulder extender, teres major, internal rotator, and then we're going to see the pectoralis major and the pectoralis minor. And honestly, the pec minor is really the big bad here. I mean, they're both contributing, make no mistake. But the pectoralis major is almost not doing as much damage as the pec minor is. But let's look up the pectoralis major. Let's see if I can just find all KenHub pictures today. KenHub's so great. They do such a good job. So here's your pectoralis major, right? Here's those beach muscles that we're always working on, right? This is kind of an interesting muscle. You'll notice that it's got two kind of different sets of fibers here, right? Like this is what's called a fly muscle or a fan muscle. And you'll see how it does this kind of interesting twist right here, right? And this section of the fibers, this upper pectoralis section right in here, that actually contributes a little bit to shoulder flexion. So ideally, that would actually help us raise our arm up overhead. Like when you're doing like that front raise with the dumbbells, yeah, it's primarily a deltoid exercise. You know, you're doing those dumbbell raises, right? But your pec, your top fibers are there to help. This is also why the incline chest press, very good for working those top fibers, because you are performing sort of both actions, right? You're taking the arms up into, you know, shoulder flexion, but you're also doing that horizontal adduction movement, which is what the rest of the pec does, right? So these fibers, they're in charge of pulling this way, grabbing this bone and pulling it in what is called horizontal adduction. I'm adding it to my midline, right? So chest flies, right? That's the pec major, or chest presses, right? Notice how that's the same movement, right? Obviously, like my elbow is straight in this version, but if I bend my elbow, right? That's the same movement. If I also perform that with like, you know, elbow extension, suddenly I'm doing a perfect chest press, right? So that's your pectoralis fibers, right? So why is that causing the arms to fall if that's actually helping with shoulder extension, right? I'm sorry, shoulder flexion, right? Because arms falling forward is an extension / adduction problem. Well, in this case, it is actually the bottom fibers of your pectoralis major, and those, they work with the lat. So the bottom part of your pec, way down here, pulls your arm this way. So it's interesting because the pec is all technically one muscle, but the top fibers pull this way, the bottom fibers pull this way. It's very similar to your trapezius muscles, which makes a lot of sense considering it's directly on the opposite side of the body, and generally muscles kind of act similar to their, you know, antagonists. We're very symmetrical creatures, you know, cutting us either left to right or front to back. There's a lot of symmetry in the human body. So the pecs are very similar to your trap muscles, actually. But like I said, the pec major is contributing to this problem, but it's not really the big bad. The real big bad here is your pectoralis minor. This is the muscle that causes a lot of problems when it comes to arms falling forward. And you'll notice this is underneath your main pectoral muscle, but rather than being attached to your sternum, this muscle, rather than being attached like here and running out, rather than attaching here and running out to the humerus, this is running from these 3 ribs right here, and it's attached to your scapula. So the pec major attaches to the arm. The pec minor attaches to the scapula. So this little, what's called your coracoid process, right? It's this little hook that comes through on your scapula, points towards the front of the body. You can feel it right here. That little hook underneath your collarbone, right? My collarbones, like my collarbone's running right here. So my coracoid process is going to be just below that, right about here. And if you give that a little push, you'll feel what I'm talking about. Obviously, this is deep. This is a muscle underneath my pec major, but this is really the big bad here that is causing that rounding shoulders, right? This is causing shoulder protraction, and it's doing that problem we've talked about before, where it's downwardly tilting my scapula, right? Because it's grabbing the top and it's pulling it this way. So that's causing my scapula to kind of round over like this. This is the big contributor, along with the lats, to shoulder rounding and arms falling forward. Let's see if I can find that Ken Hub picture of this version. Come on, Ken Hub. I got 3 other versions. Give me some consistency here. Boo. Lame. Okay. Well, we got the one. We got other pictures. All right. So there's your pec minor there. So these are the 4 muscles, right, that are really contributing to that arms falling forward situation. Somebody who's having a hard time keeping it up, right? It's going to be, that's your teres minor, that's not what I want. It's going to be your teres major, your pectoralis major, your pectoralis minor, and I guess I closed the latissimus dorsi. Latissimus dorsi. Well, heck, actually, that one's not Ken Hub either. Whatever. We'll do green. I do like these green ones. So those are your 4 main overactive muscles, right, on this list. Now, what's underactive? So those are all the muscles we need to stretch, right? So, how do I stretch my lat? Well, if it's in charge of, extension, I'm going to stretch it by doing flexion, right? A ball lat stretch would be a really good version of this. Again, I don't have a stability ball with me or anything, but if I were to take my palm up onto a stability ball, just kind of like this, and just sit, can you see me? Yeah, straight back like that, I'm going to pull myself into, shoulder flexion. That's going to stretch that out. Now, I did it with the palm down. I could do that, but if I want to get even more out of it, remember, my lat also does internal rotation. So if I want to get a deeper lat stretch, what do? External rotation. So I'm actually going to go with this sort of a bladed hand here on the edge of that ball as I reach. And that little bladed position is what's going to give me that pull right under the arm, right? I need to stretch out. So that's a great stretch for the latissimus there. Now, I also need to stretch my teres major, right? And again, the teres major is an internal rotator. So how do I stretch it? I'm going to do external rotation. One of my favorites for this is a scarecrow stretch. So I can literally just go here and just reach those palms straight back like that. And so I'm just going to reach back. Do you guys notice, by the way, do you guys see a huge difference between my right arm and my left? Like, watch this. Let's see here. And look from the side. And look from the side. This one's like 90 degrees and this one's like cocked back. That's because this is my flick arm when I'm playing Frisbee and I do a flick. I'm used to doing a lot of external rotation. huge difference between left and right arm there. So that's you teres, you know, that's how you can stretch out that teres major. You can do a rotator cuff stretch backwards. Pectoralis major, that is primarily in charge of horizontal adduction. So I can stretch it by doing horizontal abduction. So there's a couple different stretches here. One of my favorites is just a classic, they call it a pectoral wall stretch. And it's or sometimes it's called a doorway stretch. And it's called that because if you were to go to a doorway and put your arms up like this and try to step through, that is going to stretch both of your pecs simultaneously. This stretch is great. You'll feel that right along those fibers in your chest there. Now, your pec minor, it's also going to get a little stretch like that as long as you're, you know, kind of pinching your shoulder blades back. That drawing it back this way is going to help a little bit. But your pec minor can be a little bit of a pain in the butt because, again, this is attached to your scapula, not your humerus. So if I want to stretch my chest, all I have to do is take my arm back like this, right? That's my pec major. But my pec minor, I got to draw that scapula backwards in order to stretch that. So a lot of times what you'll see is this stretch right here. Whoops, ma'am. Yeah, what's up, Irene?
Brett, do you mind showing us a picture with all those 4 muscles, like all in one? Once you get.
See if I can find one. Maybe. 1 second. Good question. So I'm going to show you this little video here, though, because the pecs are kind of a pain in the butt to stretch effectively. So I want to show you this little 1-minute video here. And then I will.
For our static pec stretch, you may want to find an object such as a box, a plyo box, a stability ball, or maybe even standing up against a wall to perform this stretch. To begin, let's come into a quadruped position. The knees are going to be positioned underneath the hips. The hands are underneath the shoulders. Now take the arm to be stretched and place it up on your box. The elbow is going to be approximately the same height as the shoulder. Be sure you maintain a neutral position of the spine and slowly lower yourself down until you feel the first point of tension here in the chest on the arm being stretched. Hold that position for 30 seconds.
So what's nice about that is because she's being like held down
First point of tension
from elbow, right? You can see that there. That's drawing her whole scapula backwards. Honestly, I like that one, but I'm an even bigger fan of, here's a guy, Brent Bookbush.
With Fundrise,
I think this is
real
the video
estate
I've watched
investing is
before.
simpler and smarter than ever before.
I think this is the right video. Brent Bookbush does like a million videos, and they're hard to keep track of. I think this is the right one.
This is Brent, president of B2C Fitness, and we're talking about our static stretching techniques. In this video, we're going to tackle the pec stretch. Of course, if we're dealing with individuals with upper body dysfunction, we have adaptively shortened structures. We can't just deal with the pec major. We have to make sure the pec minor is incorporated in the stretch as well. So I'm going to have my friend Lauren come out and help me demonstrate how to take our standard pec wall stretch and ensure that our pec minor is getting lengthened as well.
So really quickly, one thing about the doorway stretch, you can go like I did, which is like perfectly 90. You can also go slightly higher when you're trying to do your pec stretches. See how I'm going into a little bit of like, you know, I'm taking my shoulders further up into abduction. That is going to get me a little bit even further in that chest just because that is taking it away. Remember, your chest actually, you know, sort of contributes to that downward press, right? So by pulling the arms up slightly, that can actually help a little bit. That's why she's got this sort of high angle here. Both are really good. If you're really tight in your chest, I would actually recommend kind of hitting multiple angles here because of those multiple sections of the pec.
So you guys can see how I have this set up. Her elbow is just past the edge of this wall. She's got her elbow bent, right? And her hand kind of curled up just a little bit. The reason we're going to go ahead and do that is if we get straight out, with the fingers extended, it's real easy to lengthen our median and ulnar nerves. And you get this like tingly sensation down the arm. We don't want to deal with any of that, for now anyway. We want to make sure that we're stretching these two structures. We stick to our goal, so to speak. So we got this stretch. This is a good stretch. This is our pec major stretch. You guys have all seen this. You've probably seen it, however, with the elbow kind of down the wall this way. Well, I see a lot of people stretch this way. This might be effective for the pec major, but it certainly is not effective for the pec minor. So a little anatomy lesson. Our pec minor goes from coracoid process to ribs 3, 4, and 5. It protracts the scapula, downwardly rotates the scapula, and anteriorly tips the scapula. So what I need to make sure that we lengthen the pec minor is she's going to bring her elbow up. All right, so this way we have upwardly rotated the scapula, lengthening the pec minor a little bit. She's going to retract her scapula, lengthening the pec minor a little further. And then actually, as she retracted, she also did just a little bit of thoracic extension for me, which is going to posteriorly tip her scapula and lengthen the pec minor just that much further. She should feel this both along this lateral aspect of her pec, as well as possible.
Really quick, I just want to point out, this lady's doing what I'm doing right now. She's like, yep, everything he's saying is true. I can see her face.
Through the whole body of the pec major. I do find that of the two, pec minor has a much larger propensity to get tight in individuals. Even when most people are talking about pec soreness, I find a lot of people will point to their pec minor. So don't be surprised that you set somebody up and this is the only place they feel it. Now with all static stretching, guys, we are going to hold a position calmly. We're going to take nice deep breaths, and we're going to wait for a feeling of release, ideally. This should take some
about 30 seconds. So those are your two versions, right? We have the doorway stretch, which is kind of flat. That's for your pec major. You can go a little bit higher, and that'll get a little bit more into the pec minor. Like I said, you're going to hit those individual sections of the pec. Some people will even do down low like this, and they'll pull back like that. If you do like a lot of decline bench press or a lot of dips, that kind of pull back this way can also be really effective. But I don't know, those exercises aren't really that common, so we don't see it that often. Shoulder joint muscles. So Irene, you wanted to see all of them at once. I found one. Where is it? There it is. So here is all of those muscles sort of in one chart, right? So our overactive, here's the front of the body, here's the back of the body. Our overactive muscles are going to be that pectoralis major. You can't really see it here, but that pectoralis minor, so that one's running right here underneath. It's going to be your teres major, which is right here, and your latissimus dorsi right here. What is my neighbor doing? They are honking their horn 3 times over and over again. Oh my God. All right, so those are your overactive muscles in arms falling forward. Do we have any questions on those? What are you doing? Oh, it's the kid. My neighbor's son is literally in the window, and he's got the car, and he's hitting the lock button over and over and over again. That's hilarious, actually. All right. Any questions on those overactive muscles? Good. Okay. Let's look at the underactive list. So those are your 4 overactive. Let's look at the underactive. So again, we're going to see the middle and lower trapezius here, right? Remember, the middle trapezius is in charge of that shoulder retraction, right? It's going to pull the shoulder blades back this way. And then lower trapezius is in charge of retraction and depression. So that's pinching the shoulder blades down and back, right? We're also going to see the rhomboids, also in charge of shoulder retraction. So all these muscles here are all working directly opposite that pectoralis major and the pectoralis minor, right? Because both of those are causing that protraction. This is going to be all focused on retraction. Pectoralis minor is also going to cause a little bit of elevation. Lower traps are going to cause depression, right? And then we're also going to see the rhomboids there. That is also directly shoulder retraction, right? And then the latissimus dorsi, which is causing internal rotation, the teres major, which is causing internal rotation. Those are muscles that are working directly opposite your rotator cuff, which is causing external rotation. So your muscles of your so your teres major, and actually, man, you can almost see it here. Your teres major is this muscle right here. Teres minor, that's part of the rotator cuff. Your infraspinatus, this big muscle right back here, also part of the rotator cuff, right? Supraspinatus, right? All of those muscles that pull you into external rotation. That's just being sort of looped together as the general like rotator cuff, right? Oh, actually, hold on. That was a great picture. We already had it. That's great. Look at that. All right, so here's your rotator cuff, right? You can see you've got your subscapularis, right, which is actually over on this side. It's called subscapularis, by the way, because it's underneath. It's sub your scapula. So it's actually, the reason you can't see it from the back here is because it's on the deep side of your scapula. You get your supraspinatus up top, infraspinatus down below, and these muscles are all attached to the back of the humerus, and when they pull into external rotation, right? And then the big one here, teres minor, which is really being inhibited by that teres major. You know, these are basically working on both sides of this joint. The way I always describe it when I'm showing it to people, right, is imagine this is your humerus, right? And it can rotate in these two directions. Your teres major is tied in the front, your teres minor is tied in the back. One causes internal rotation, the other one causes external rotation. So they're just constantly pulling, and that's causing that rotary movement, right? Well, the teres major is getting help from your giant lat muscles, and your teres minor is getting help from these other little tiny rotator cuff muscles like your infraspinatus and supraspinatus and subscapularis. So generally, we just kind of loop that all together and just call it the rotator cuff, and that actually works just fine. They're all the muscles that cause external rotation, guys. That's your rotator cuff's job. So again, middle and lower trapezius / rhomboids, those are all retractors and rotator cuffs. So we're going to focus on building a program that is majorly all about pinching those shoulder blades back and all about doing external rotation. So in our warm-up for a client whose arms fall forward, we are going to do foam SMR for the upper trapezius. Now you'll notice here it says for the upper and actually we're going to also SMR the pec minor. For the upper trapezius and the pec minor, you are going to want to use a lacrosse ball or a tennis ball. So the pec minor is located right here. So in order to kind of get that with a tennis ball, you actually need to kind of use a wall. But what you'll do is you'll go pec minor. You'll use this little tiny lacrosse ball, and you'll put it right here on that coracoid. Oh, that's great. That coracoid process, right? There's ribs 3, 4, right? So you're going to place that tennis ball or that lacrosse ball right there, and you're just going to kind of pin it straight to the wall. This guy's actually using the wall. I don't like doing that. I like to use a doorway so that like my face isn't hitting a wall or anything. You could also just lay on it like that. I personally don't like doing that version. I like to go to like a corner. But again, you're just going to press that. That's so funny. It's like going into his skin. Yeah, there you go. You can see like this person's using like a post. So you're going to go like right on there and you can kind of press onto that. It's a great spot. It's a great spot to kind of place that tennis ball, that lacrosse ball, whatever it is that you happen to be using. Same thing with your upper trapezius. Upper traps. There's 2 places you can place this roller. Actually, there's a guy using the bar like I actually like to do. But there is going straight to the upper portion here. So you can place that lacrosse ball like up top. And that's a great way to kind of get in. Like right as it's about to hit your neck, this area right in here, you can place a lacrosse ball or get up under like a bar and press that there. But another good spot for that actually is very effective. You'll notice he's much lower down, right as it's on this ridge of like the scapula there, right? So like right along this ridge here, you can actually press And that's still getting just the very lower or origin fibers of that trapezius muscle, right? Both of those are just fine. And if you look at the upper trapezius trigger points, right? These are some good areas where you can hit with like that tennis ball or that lacrosse ball, right? You can either place, you know, here or here, here. That's, I don't know, that's getting into like middle traps. That's getting into lower traps, but like these are all like very good areas. So you can go here, you can go down here, both very effective. It just kind of depends on where you're tight. In the same way that like when you're foam rolling, you kind of move, the reason they call it rolling is because you're kind of rolling around until you're like, ooh, you know, like, that's tender, right? Once you find that tender spot, that's where you sit and hold. So play around with these spots, guys. Make sure you find like what's tight on you. So, and then we just do a classic latissimus dorsi, right? Maybe it's up under the elbow, under the armpit, or maybe it's down below near the ribs, right? Depends on where you're going to be tight. Maybe it's really posterior. Maybe it's even a little bit anterior where it kind of wraps. Depends on where your lats are tight, but that's where you're going to place the foam roller. So we're going to foam roll those 3 primary muscles. Once they are inhibited and kind of we've mashed up that fascia a little bit, then we're going to do a static ball lat stretch, which is going to be, I'm going to pull up a video of this because I've been demoing on my bed for the last few classes. Let's watch the actual video on how to do it. So he's just going to place that right there, right? And that's pulling his shoulder into, shoulder extension because shoulder flexion, because that lat muscle is in charge of extension, right? Chat bubble wall guy. So that's that ball lat stretch. We've got the pectoral wall stretch that we saw a little bit earlier. We've got that upper trapezius stretch like we talked about, right? That's that one where you're going to drop to the side, and then you're going to reach the arm down, creating length in the neck there, right? Oop. I made a mistake of keeping YouTube going. And then we're going to do a static teres major stretch. Again, this is going to be kind of that rotator cuff activator, right? Like a lot of times you're going to focus on external rotation. So yeah, you'll see sometimes people do this version here. They'll reach back and pull. I don't personally think that's a very great, it's not really focusing on external rotation so much, but sometimes you'll see people do this version where they'll keep their palms face up and they'll just reach straight back. My favorite is, like I said, the scarecrow stretch. That's my favorite rotator cuff stretch personally. Sometimes you'll also see, where's the broomstick stretch? So sometimes you'll see people, not that one. Although I do love the broomstick, they call it dislocations. But sometimes you'll see this version here. So what he's doing is he's got this broomstick dropped behind his arm and he's pulling it back. He's going to pull from the bottom. He's going to pull it forward. Meanwhile, he's like grabbing it like this. So that's going to cause his arm to go into external rotation. It's a good teres major stretch. I like this stretch. It's not very practical in a lot of gym settings just because you're not always going to have like a broomstick available. But that can be a really good, external rotation. Actually, don't do this version though. It's totally the opposite. This guy's doing where he's actually internally rotating. I mean, if you have an overactive external rotator, this isn't bad, but that is totally internal rotation. We do not need to get any better at that. That's the thing that we all spend too much time doing. So there's your static teres major stretch. Again, we're going to do each of these for 30 seconds. Put them on a rowing machine for 5 minutes for our cardio, right? You'll notice like we changed up. Normally it's like treadmill, 5 minutes, yeah. This time we decided to do the rowing machine because that's going to focus a lot on pinching those shoulder blades back, get those rhomboids activated, get those middle traps activated. For our core balance and reactive, our 2 core exercises here, we've got the iso prone cobra. Which again is that Superman, but rather than having the arms up like this, we're going to have the arms down and back like this, and we're going to turn the thumbs up towards the ceiling. So we're focusing on really pinching those lower traps, right? We're pulling into an A fly, right? And that's going to be great for pinching those low trap muscles back into shoulder retraction. Then we're also going to do the quadruped opposite arm, opposite leg raise, way more commonly referred to as the bird dog, which is a much better name for it. But
4-point stance on.
You can see you're going to go here. I always love to tell my clients, you don't necessarily, you see people always demo with like their foot, with their arm externally rotated, but I love get a little external rotation there. Again, you always use more external rotation. Also, I always like to use the opportunity, he's pointing his toe. I always like to use the opportunity to activate the anterior tibialis and have them pull their toe up towards their face. So that way they're getting a little shin activator while they're doing this. And, you know, the erector spinae is stabilizing, the core is stabilizing. This is a great core stabilization exercise. So there's our 2 core movements. For our balance exercise, we decided to do the single leg lift and chop. So again, that's the one from, I think we did the one yesterday. So you're gonna stand on one leg, and again, they're focusing on lifting those arms. You know, that way they're stretching out their lats, they're learning how to activate those muscles that will get those arms up overhead. And then we did a cone jump frontal to stabilization. So they're going to jump over a cone and stabilize. That's not really a huge, that's not really doing much for their shoulders. But it's a reactive exercise. So reactive exercises don't really ever do anything for the upper body. They're a lower body thing, but there's sort of a classic movement prep for this would be, if you got a client whose arms fall forward, this would be a great warm up before upper body day. So, if you were following that up with like a bench press, wide grip, lat pull down, I don't know, let's do an incline chest press, pair that up with barbell bent over row, and then military press. And there you go. There's a full upper body day, right? 3 sets of 12, whatever. Either way, before they do any of those movements, we know that they are nice and warmed up, using in all the muscles that were deactivated that couldn't turn on before. We allowed the muscles that were keeping them from getting turned on to sort of relax, and then we got the muscles that are supposed to be doing the work turned on. What was here? What the heck? Oh, that was the ball lat stretch. Why did I delete stuff? What happened? Okay. Questions on that routine? Comments, concerns? All right. Let's take a look at forward head posture and shoulders elevation. Very, very similar, right? This is kind of what we talked about yesterday, but in our upper body assessment, we found that our client gets that really bad forward head reach and they got that really bad shoulder elevation. So overactive muscles, actually they don't put it on this one, which is so dumb. Driving me crazy. Got to switch to the other list. So we saw forward head posture and shoulder elevation. Our overactive muscles list are almost the same. It's going to be your levator scapulae is causing that forward head posture, and that levator scapulae is also overactive on the shoulder elevation. So that's the same. Overactive is going to be the sternocleidomastoid. That's that front neck muscle that pulls the head forward. And then the only one that's slightly different here is the upper trapezius is overactive in elevation, and the scalenes are overactive in forward head. But both of those are actually stretched the same way. So those are our overactive muscles, right? So what we're going to do to stretch those out is we are going to foam roll the thoracic spine. Now, yesterday you heard me say do not foam roll your spine, right? And that is true. You do not want to foam roll your low back, but because there is so much muscle and your shoulder blades are there to protect your upper back, you can actually do a little bit of foam rolling technique in the thoracic spine. And this can just kind of mash up the whole area and kind of promote some blood flow. This is actually one of the only examples where rather than sitting and holding, which you're actually kind of seeing him do here, when you're foam rolling your thoracic spine, you can actually kind of just roll around a little bit and just kind of mash everything, get some blood flow. And that can actually be used as a pretty good like muscle activator, which is really what you want, right? We want to activate those muscles to pull our shoulder blades back. Again, though, if I wanted to foam roll my upper trapezius, right, I would use a lacrosse ball or a tennis ball, and I'd place it again either here or maybe off to the side here. So the foam roller can kind of get into that area just a little bit for the upper trap, so you can get the bottom fibers of it. But a lacrosse ball is going to be much better for really getting in there. Also, we're going to foam roll that latissimus dorsi so we can sort of loosen up that area in here. The lats, honestly, guys, are not going to have they're not really playing a huge role in forward head posture and shoulders elevating, but it's always nice to kind of unloosen this area if you're trying to like draw those shoulder blades back. Just because if they are having this, they probably have, they probably have shoulder rounding as well. Usually don't see too much elevation without rounding, and rounding is often caused by, we're going to see the lats there. I know it's not on the list, just so you know. we know it's not on there, but it's always a good one to foam roll. The lats are tight on like everybody. So we need to do static stretches. You're going to see these are the same 3 muscles we hit yesterday, right? We're going to do that levator scapulae stretch, the upper traps, and the sternocleidomastoid. So levator scapulae, I'm reaching down with my opposite arm, looking over and down and sniffing the pit, right? And I'm just reaching. Upper trap, same thing, I'm reaching. Sternocleidomastoid, I'm reaching, and I like to depress my collarbone with this same arm. So I like to push here while I'm also reaching with this arm. Front of the neck, side of the neck, back of the neck, right? So those are the 3 that are going to help with that elevation and that forward head posture. And then again, we get a ball lat stretch in there to kind of loosen everything up under the arms and sort of, get those arms to be able to, get that whole shoulder joint a little bit more mobile. Again, we're going to warm up with the rowing machine here. Get the blood pumping just like we do with any warm up before a workout. But again, we're focusing on a retraction here, which is going to be the opposite of those trapezius muscles that are so overactive. For our core balance and reactive exercises, there's not a lot of core exercises that are really doing a ton of like scapular retraction other than the floor prone cobra. That's always going to be a staple, right? Because again, it's just so good for working those low traps, right? That little A pull is just so good for activating the scapula there. But you will notice I put marching down here. So marching is a great core exercise. Oh no, does Nassim not have a video for marching? Nassim, you're screwing me. All right, well, watch this lady. She's doing a good job. So here's marching. This is actually a very simple looking core exercise, but this is a very good transverse abdominis. It is really not moving your spine. If I've got a client who's a real beginner, marching is a great way to teach them really how to just to start turning their core on. And it's literally as simple as this. She's going to brace her abs. She's going to pull her belly button towards her spine, and she's just lifting up like this. Now, why am I choosing this exercise for working on shoulders elevating in a forward head posture? Because her head is going to stay on the floor the entire time. Notice her eye line, by the way. It's not too bad, but do you guys see how she's slightly looking just a little bit behind her? That's a sign of a forward head posture. So I would instruct my client to lift their head up, tuck their chin, and then lay it back. And that laying back is going to activate those deep cervical flexors, while she's working on her core down here. So I'm multitasking, right? And you'll notice in the coaching tips, keep chin tucked for the deep cervical flexors. That is, if I've got a client with a forward head posture and I really can't convince them to just take 5 minutes to like meditate in this position, I'll fool them into doing it with a little bit of core work. We'll bait them into it, right? They don't want to do the deep cervical flexors because nobody wants to work the deep cervical flexors. Fine, let's work the core and I'll still work the deep cervical flexors, right? So we're really focusing on kind of getting that activated there. And then again, floor prone cobra, obviously, focus on that scapular retraction. For our balance exercise, we are going to do a single leg windmill. Really great exercise here. That's actually not it. Give me the NASA one. Oh, no. Okay. Well, it is close. He's just going too far down. This guy, okay. This is what a single leg windmill should look like. She's reaching for her knees. This guy's reaching too low. He's going for his toe. It's close, but that's closer to like a full-on deadlift at that point. But what the single leg windmill is you are going to stand on one leg like so. All right, so I'm going to stand on my left leg, and I'm going to lift this thigh. I'm not going to get it fully parallel to the ground, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate towards my knee here, and then I'm going to go back to neutral, and then I'm going to do the exact opposite, and this side's so much harder, and I'm going to rotate this way. And my hip stays pointing forward. What I'm not doing is I'm not rotating my pelvis. I'm rotating from my spine up. So, Charlie, this is mostly a note for you, but I know Irene, Robert, and Raul, you guys have heard this before. Remember, this is our balance exercise, right? Single leg windmill. It is, and we are in phase 1, so it's a balance stabilization exercise, which means no movement of the balance leg. Now, these two core movements, they are core stabilization exercise. This was all about no movement of the spine, but we can move the spine in a balance exercise. We just can't move the balance leg. So you'll notice when I'm doing these windmills, the reason I don't like that one guy's demo is because he's going down like this. He's doing a full hip movement, right? That's moving his balance leg. So if I'm going here and I just rotate like this, and I rotate like this, my hip did not move. I didn't move my hip. I moved my spine. And sometimes people are confused by that because they'll go, wait. You said we weren't allowed to move the spine. And I was like, well, I said no movement of the spine in core stabilization. This is balance stabilization. Move the spine. Don't move the balance leg. Charlie, that'll become more clear in a few days. I will do plenty of time on that if that was confusing. Did that actually, although for those of you who have heard this before, did that distinction make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I for the most part understand what you're talking about.
Cool.
I never tire hearing it, Brad.
I know.
I love it.
Those rules are important. They really are. To be fair, here's the thing. They're important to pass your test. In the real world, no one's out there being like, I saw some movement there. You know, that's not how the real world works. But it's important to keep it clear in your head so that you understand the categories. And then our reactive exercise, again, we're not really going to get much here, but just cone jump, sagittal to stabilization. So jumping forward, hold, right? Again, this is not really about posture for the upper body. This is a great activator for the low body, but we're only looking at upper body dysfunction here. So we got the deep cervical flexors turned on with the marching. We got the lower traps and middle traps turned on with the cobra. And we got a little bit of trap activation, just focusing on retracting those shoulder blades, keeping those arms extended out away, a little bit of middle trap activation with that balance exercise. I don't think it's great. I just only wanted to pick textbook examples. Like every exercise that we picked in all of these example programs are in your book directly. Now, me personally, if I were really working on somebody who had like rounded shoulders, my favorite balance exercise, and it isn't in your book, is just a classic single leg balance with cable external rotation or resistance band external rotation. So I'll just tie a band over here to my left, and I'll pull and externally rotate to my right, and then I'll switch legs and pull this way, right? That's actually my favorite, but again, it's not a textbook example, so we don't have that version. That's actually all I got. That's our conversation for the day. How do you guys feel? Do you have any questions or comments about any of the muscles we talked about? Why we picked what exercises? Any exercise you think would be better? Anything like that?
No.
No.
Are your traps a neck, back, or shoulder muscle?
Ooh. Oh no. Man, that's such a good question. I mean, your middle and lower traps are for sure your back. There's no debate about that. I find that if you're going to do upper trap work, which you know me, don't do upper trap work. I tend to put those on my shoulder days because you do things like upright rows, which tends to be, you can see that's abduction, which is like my deltoid. So I find that upper traps work really well on shoulder days, but your middle and lower traps, definitely upper back, definitely upper back. And then rotator cuff works really well on shoulder days. But yeah, that's about it. Any other questions? That's a good one. That was like a debatable question.
Good.
All right, guys. Well, that is it for the recording. I'll see all y'all tomorrow.